It's right here. Here it comes, here it comes. Here it's walking right here. Yeah, I got it. Here's his body right here, looking right at me. Okay, now, I'm crying at this moment, so excuse my voice. It's right here. You can see it. Okay.
Our guest is a person who's done just about every conceivable supernatural occurrence that there is. He's done lake monsters, he's done ghosts, he's done UFOs. He's been written up in the globe for his wide variety of his coverage of supernatural phenomena. So I'm sure I'll have more than a few surprises in store for us. So please welcome John Horrigan.
Thank you, Alan, and welcome everybody. And on such a rainy day here in Fields Corner Annual Street Fair, but I'm glad to see everybody come out. And I think it was pointed, Alan chose this topic because we're nearing Halloween, which is a celebration of ghosts and goblins and witches. Now, in tackling ghosts, it's a very difficult problem because sometimes, as Dr. Jacques Vallée said, we have to understand that we may not be able to understand. And as ambiguous as that sounds, we may be dealing with something on a different plane. Now, personally, as Alan just told you, I'm considered by some to be a paraskeptic. I've done over 100 cable television programs on the supernatural entitled Omnibus Unlimited. I host a radio program for the blind entitled Tales with an I. And I've lectured hundreds of times. I've been to Roswell, New Mexico twice, the site of a purported flying saucer crash. I've been to Loch Ness, sightings of purported sea monsters. I've been out to Vancouver, British Columbia, Seattle, Portland, Ohio, in searching of a purported Bigfoot. I was in Gulf Breeze, Florida last week, where it's allegedly the hotbed of UFO sightings. I've gone to the hot spots and I've never, ever had any sort of anomalous or paranormal encounter. That's not to say that they don't exist. And that's not to say that I don't believe you if you've had a paranormal encounter, but I guess when you least expect it, that's when you have these paranormal encounters. You can't go looking for them. But anyways, with ghosts, you have such a wide array of phenomena, whether it's a poltergeist, which is an evil spirit that taunts and torments the occupants of a house or an automobile or what have you. You have friendly spirits that don't cause any trouble, don't rattle any dishes or anything like that, but seem to linger. You have angelic or angel experiences, whereby somebody's life has changed due to an encounter by an apparition, or their life is somehow saved due to the advice of an apparition. And I'm going to try to touch on that wide plethora. And I'm also going to touch on demons, and what I mean by demons are mythical beasts, not necessarily devils and Satanism. I'm not going to go near that. And I will look at, though, religious apparitions, purported apparitions of the Virgin Mary that have taken place in the 60s and 70s as well. But the important thing is for you to make your own decision. I'm not here to sell you on ghosts. I'm not here to tell you that there aren't ghosts. What I like to do is sift through my many books and find some stories, some nice little ditties, throw them out to you as they're written by the author, and then for you to decide. Because stories, like the game of telephone, tend to get stretched and twisted out of proportion when they're retold and retold and retold. I've investigated certain cases, a case called the Dover Demon over in Dover, Massachusetts, whereby some teenagers in 1977 saw this 4.5-foot tall creature with an orange bulbous head clinging to a tree. And I've seen 10 different accounts of that story, and 10 different stories. The facts change. So I like to go to the source. Usually the most accurate source is the story that's printed near when the event occurred. But anyway, so let's talk about America and where we live in New England. New England's rich in history, and there are literally hundreds of ghosts that are whooping it up here in New England. This is a book by Robert Ellis Cahill, who along with Edward Rowe Snow is one of my favorite writers. It's called New England's Ghostly Haunts. But New England could be considered the spirit capital of America. Of course, we have in Salem witches and old structures which seem to be the habitats for ghosts. But you have to understand that what I'm going to tell you today is that A, you have to decide between one of the four choices, that real spirits, these are real spirits from beyond. B, that they're no more than products of old legends. C, were created for some devious or mischievous reason, a hoax, or D, as Scrooge said of Marley's ghost, the result of some undigested piece of beef. So what you're saying is either these are real, they're a figment of your imagination, they're hoaxes, or you have an ability to see at a different plane than a normal human being. But anyways, I have so many encounters here, I want to get to them. This is the first recorded and documented sighting of a ghost in America. It was the year 1799 in Machiasport, Maine. August 9th of that year, Abner Blaisdell and his family began hearing strange knocking noises in their seaside house. On January 2nd of the following year, Abner and his daughter heard a woman's voice from the cellar say that she was Captain George Butler's deceased wife, and that her original name was Nellie Hooper. David Hooper, Nellie's father, lived only 6 miles from the Blaisdells, so Abner sent for him. Old David was as skeptical a Yankee as you'd ever find in New England, but he trudged the 6 miles through drifting snow to see what was going on. Abner explained to David Hooper that his daughter's ghost had been around the house for some 5 months, and he had no idea why she had chosen his house to haunt, and not her husband's or her father's. David and Abner went into the cellar, and the voice was heard again. Old Mr. Hooper became an immediate believer. He asked the voice questions to which only he and his dead daughter knew the answers, and she replied to his satisfaction. So he believed that it was her voice. She gave such clear and irresistible tokens of her being the spirit of my own daughter as gave me no less satisfaction than admiration and delight. So there's the first ghost sighting. This will go to Wareham now. Harold Gordon Cudworth repairs violins and pianos in Wareham, Mass. He's also a talented violin player and owns a collection of 40 rare and valuable violins, the rarest and oldest being a Hornsteiner made in Germany in 1769. One evening back in 1945, Mr. Cudworth took down his Hornsteiner fiddle and began to play Van Veen's The Broken Melody. Well, there came a tremendous rumbling from the kitchen like the sound of a freight train. So Cudworth stopped playing. He and his mother investigated and concluded that it was merely the gurgling of the kitchen sink. Harold continued playing the violin. The noise started up again, only louder this time. And it wasn't the sink. It was a deafening roar coming out of nowhere that would stop only when Harold Cudworth stopped playing his violin. When he tried playing a different tune, there was no noise. Only when he played The Broken Melody did his kitchen rumble. So Cudworth, not being a superstitious man, as people investigated, a few weeks after the first incident while playing The Broken Melody in his living room, similar loud noises came from upstairs in the house. Cudworth went upstairs. The latch on the attic door jiggled 4 times. Apparently my musical ghost just wanted me to let me know that he was there, Cudworth said. So when Cudworth practiced in his upstairs room, his door latch wiggled when he played the melody. In fact, one evening he heard the bedroom door slam shut, but when he looked up, the door was open. Now these happenings were beginning to wear on Cudworth's nerves. He was especially shaken another evening when, upon returning home from a meeting, he found his music cabinet open. He remembered closing it when he went out. Also, the music sheet sitting on top of the others inside of the cabinet was The Broken Melody. It was a year later that Cudworth discovered that the musical ghost sometimes followed him around. He was in New Bedford giving a young girl violin lessons, and after the lesson, her father asked him to play The Broken Melody. Cudworth hesitated at first, but since he was far from Wareham, he agreed and began playing the haunting tune. Immediately, the freight train sound that Cudworth had first heard in his kitchen was coming from the front hall of his New Bedford home. Then the front door began rattling until it sounded as though it was about to be shaken off its hinges. The man rushed downstairs to see who was trying to break down his front door, and Cudworth wisely decided to stop playing. In fact, he decided not to play The Broken Melody ever again. So there you have a haunted violin to start things off. Ghost pictures. I had a video I was going to show ghosts of Gettysburg, but ghost photographs are so rare. I'm going to show you one in just a second. This is a book called Great Mysteries, Spectral Animals, Poltergeists, Ghostly Ladies and Lovers, Friendly Ghosts, and Fierce Ghosts. This here is a story about Dorothy Walpole. Another ghostly lover who has haunted Raynham Hall, a stately home in East Anglia, England, is thought to be the spirit of Dorothy Walpole, sister of one of England's prime ministers, Sir Robert Walpole. She was brought up alongside a boy named Charles Townshend, a viscount, who was set to inherit a vast fortune and considerable estates. Later, Dorothy and Charles fell in love and wanted to marry, but Dorothy's father refused permission on the grounds of his pride. He did not want the Townsends to think that his family coveted their fortunes. In the end, Charles married somebody else. Dorothy went off to London and then to Paris, where she drowned her sorrows in reckless living. When she learned that Charles's wife had died, however, she was soon to be on her way back home to Raynham Hall. Within a year, she and Charles were married. It was 1712. For a time they were happy until rumors of his new wife's escapades in Paris began to reach Charles's ears. He made inquiries and learned that the rumors were true. In anger, he confined her to a room and allowed nobody to go near her. Within a short time, Dorothy was dead. According to the official records, the cause was smallpox, which might have been the real reason why Charles placed her in quarantine. But according to some accounts, she was quietly murdered. Whatever the reason behind her demise, her ghost began to appear. She was dressed in a brown robe, her hair disheveled, her face gray and distressed. On one occasion in 1786, she terrified no lesser a person than King George III by appearing beside his bed. The story goes that he dashed around the hall in his nightgown, ordering everyone out of bed and vowing that he would not stay in that place another hour. Witnesses who saw the ghost in subsequent years told how it seemed always to be grinning, and that there were only dark hollows where the eyes should have been. Towards the end of the 19th century, its appearances became fewer and fewer until they dwindled away almost completely. But in 1936, she was seen by two photographers who had been commissioned to take pictures of Raynham Hall's interior. They saw a shadowy form suddenly materialize on the main staircase, and one of the men had the presence of mind to take a photograph. This is the photograph of Dorothy Walpole. Heard about the White House and ghost of Abraham Lincoln? Well, there are many recorded cases of hauntings involving ghosts in which to appear there is a purpose in the afterlife. To watch benevolently over places and people, not all of them, though, are as famous as President Abraham Lincoln, whose life was cut short by an assassin's bullet on April 14, 1865. The reports of Lincoln's ghost being seen in the White House over the years are numerous. President Roosevelt never saw the specter of his distinguished predecessor, but once confided to his biographer, Carl Sandburg, that when he had been alone in the Blue Room, overlooking the Washington Monument, he had felt a strong and comforting presence which he felt in some way was associated with Lincoln. Roosevelt remained convinced that the spirit of Abraham Lincoln lived on and in the White House. So too did Roosevelt's successor, Harry S. Truman, who later revealed that during his presidential term, he was roused several times by a rapping on his bedroom door, but when he opened the door, there was nobody there. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands was also awakened by a knocking at her bedroom. Nowadays, I just might point out, if there's a knocking at your bedroom at night, it's probably Al Gore with his hand up for a donation. The White House would be staying. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands was also awakened by a knocking at her bedroom door when she was staying at the White House. No one answered her permission to enter, so she got out of bed and went to open the door herself. A moment later, she had fallen to the floor in a faint. Later, she confessed to a very concerned President Roosevelt that she had seen the figure of the late President Abraham Lincoln standing there. Lincoln's appearances have sometimes been accompanied by the sound of his loud, booming laugh, one of his characteristics. At other times, his ghost has displayed different moods. He has been seen walking away slowly and sadly through the East Room, where his body lay in state, and standing at the window of the Oval Room, gazing out towards Virginia, seemingly lost in thought. On another occasion, a maid, Mary Evan, burst into Mrs. Roosevelt's study in a state of great agitation and reported that she had just seen the ghost in the Lincoln Room. The spectral figure of the dead president had been sitting on the edge of the bed taking his boots off. Many more tenants of the White House have seen Lincoln's ghost. One theory behind the fairly frequent appearances is that he expended so much energy in fulfilling his duties during the terrible years of the Civil War that part of it lingers on, integrated into the fabric of the White House itself, and manifests itself in his form from time to time. Just one more now. regarding Lincoln, Lyndon Baines Johnson, his encounter here. LBJ reportedly encountered Lincoln's ghost when one of his dogs suddenly howled furiously and stopped dead in his tracks just outside Lincoln's room. According to the story, LBJ's shouting summoned Secret Service agents, but by the time they reached him, the spirit was gone. LBJ and Lincoln avoided one another after that. The wife of Calvin Coolidge also reported that she frequently saw the spirit of President Lincoln staring out at the Potomac, hands folded behind his back, much as they often were when he was alive. A latter story, encounter with Lincoln's ghost, yet another shaggy dog story, involves a more recent resident of the White House. President Ronald Reagan has reportedly spoken about incidents near Lincoln's bedroom when his dog Rex would start barking and staring at the door to the room. When the president opened the door and called the dog in with him, Rex would back down the hall too frightened to enter. Apparently, the revered president is still a quite popular resident of the White House. Abe is around it well. I get into visions of the Virgin Mary, encounters, and again, I'm not going across any religious boundaries here, but I'm just going to report from a book here by Ray Stanford. Again, this is a controversial book. He claims to be a medium, and somebody's given him this information. But anyways, the miracle of Fatima took place on successive 13th day of the month, 1917. Sunday, May 13th, 1917, found Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta, their 3 young children, tending their sheep at Cova da Aria, a large basin-shaped pasture that belonged to Lucia's father. Seeing the flock was grazing placidly, they began to play builder among the rocks and constructed a small wall. Suddenly, a brilliant flash lit the cloudless sky. Thinking that a storm was coming from beyond the hills, they headed the sheep toward home. They had gone a short distance when there was a second flash, and the young shepherds froze in their tracks. There, just a few feet in front of them, as if standing on top of a small, sturdy holm oak tree, appeared a young woman of transcendent beauty. Like the angel, the lady appeared as a radiant, luminescent form with clearly discernible features. The brilliant aura that surrounded her, and of which, in a sense, she seemed to be composed of, enveloped the children as well. She was clad in a white garment with a mantle over her head. Her hands pressed together in an attitude of prayer, held a string of pure white beads that ended in a sparkling white crucifix. And the children go on to be moved by that, and they are the only children who are allowed to see the Virgin, except one massive appearance at Fatima. Anyways, the Virgin Mary, she's appeared at Bahrain, Zeitoun, Egypt. I'm going to show you some photographs of that. Garabandal, Spain. She's appeared all over the world. Medjugorje, Yugoslavia. I'm sure you've seen the news where there's a side of a building in Florida where they show this reflection that's purportedly the Virgin Mary. Her likeness has been seen in oak trees, and the knot of an oak tree and whatnot. So throughout the last 100 years or so, she seems to be showing up more frequently and frequently in areas where there's desolation. She had an appearance in Rwanda a few years ago, and we're looking at the civil war and destruction going on there. Anyways, I want to show you some remarkable photographs from Zeitoun, Egypt in 1972 of the Virgin Mary floating over a church steeple. Now this was witnessed by hundreds of thousands of people, non-believers of every religious sect you can imagine. Doctors, lawyers, scientists. And if these photographs are hoaxes, there were a lot of hoaxers present that day because there are a lot of photographs similar to these photographs. But make your own decision.
Where was that steeple? Like what city?
This is in Zeitoun, Egypt, 1972. And some of the other apparitions, actually, can you see that above her head? That is purportedly the ghost of a dove. Okay, and there's always a rose essence, a beautiful smell associated with this. Of course, in Medjugorje, they haven't had dramatic apparitions as such, but they've had spinning sun phenomena. And the children there have experienced quite a rebirth and rejuvenation. I want to go to railway ghosts and highway horrors, phantom hitchhikers. And here's the inverse of that. This is called Big Joe. This is a story by Dan Cohen. Daniel Cohen, kids, if you want to go look up Daniel Cohen. Easy reading, all grades, good stuff, okay? He's a great writer. I think you'll enjoy him a lot. And then you may want to even get into kids. Edward Rose Snow has some fabulous books. It's easy reading, print is good, and he uses words smaller than me. But anyways, Big Joe. Randy Talbot stood in the dark, staring vacantly down the empty highway. It was beginning to rain, and there wasn't much traffic on this road at night, so his chances of getting a ride seemed slim. It looked like another night spent in the open, cold, and hungry. Randy was feeling about as low as he ever had in his life. Randy had run halfway, half been kicked out of his home at the age of 15. Try as he might, he couldn't remember a single really good day in those 15 years. Life had been an unending string of arguments and fights, and when he wasn't fighting with his parents, a sullen silence reigned. They never talked, not even to say hello. Randy sometimes wondered if his parents missed him or even noticed that he was gone. He certainly didn't miss them. But 3 years on his own had been no picnic. He had hitchhiked all over the country, sometimes sleeping in abandoned buildings or doorways. He picked up an odd job now and then. He also panhandled, shoplifted, and robbed just to get enough to eat. He wasn't a violent kid. He was just trying to get by in a very tough world. Randy kept on moving because he never found any place he really wanted to stay. He always hoped the next place would be better than the last. It never was. It was just more of the same. Well, anyways, it was the roar of the truck that he heard first. There was a big 18-wheeler laboring up the incline. Then he saw lights. Randy was almost too discouraged to stick out his thumb. The driver probably wouldn't stop anyway, he thought, but the truck ground to a halt right in front of him. The trucker leaned out of the window and said, "Where you going, kid?" "No place special," replied Randy. "Just down the road, I guess." "Well, that's where I'm going." "Get in." Randy climbed into the cab and settled himself alongside the driver. He couldn't get a good look at the man, but he could tell that he was big and he had a deep, commanding voice. "Lousy place to try to catch a ride," said the big man. "How'd you wind up here?" Years of being on his own had made Randy deeply suspicious of strangers. He didn't like talking to them. They always wanted something from you. But the big trucker with the deep voice inspired immediate confidence and trust. Usually Randy answered questions with a single word or grunt. Now he found the words pouring out of him. He began telling his complete life story to this total stranger. And though he still couldn't see the driver's face, he knew the big man was listening. Randy had just run out of words when he saw the bright lights of a truck stop up ahead. The driver pulled into the parking lot and stopped. "You've had it real rough," said the driver. "But don't give up hope. You're young, you've got time, and you can never tell what's going to happen. I've got to turn off up ahead. You get out here." The trucker shoved a $5 bill into Randy's hand. "Get yourself something to eat. The food's not bad in this place, and the apple pie's terrific. Oh, by the way, tell them Big Joe dropped you off. They know me, and they'll treat you right." Randy climbed down out of the cab. Before he even had a chance to thank his benefactor, the rig pulled out of the lot and disappeared down the road. Suddenly, Randy began to cry. This was the first act of real kindness he had ever experienced in his life, and he was overwhelmed with emotion. After he got control of himself, Randy went into the diner and ordered a cheeseburger and fries, which he polished off greedily. Then he said to the counterman, "I'll have some big apple pie, because Big Joe tells me that you have some real good apple pie." "Oh, so Big Joe dropped you off here," said the counterman. "Yeah, he's a real nice guy," Randy said. "You know him well?" "You never heard of Big Joe?" the counterman said. Randy said, "No, of course I haven't." Well, 15 years ago, Big Joe was driving down this very road when a school bus going in the opposite direction went out of control and was coming right for him. Joe swerved off the road to avoid the bus. Nobody on the bus was hurt, but Joe got killed. Since then, every once in a while, a down-and-out hitchhiker like yourself gets picked up by Joe. He gives him a couple of bucks and drops him off here for a meal. I guess you could say he was a real nice guy, and he still is. Consider yourself lucky, kid. I think he's given you a second chance. Roadside phantoms. Hitchhikers that appear out of nowhere. People give them rides. They turn to their right, and all of a sudden the occupant is gone. Several stories. Here's one. A British truck driver named Harold Unsworth was traveling along his regular route one evening a few years ago when he stopped to pick up a young man who was hitchhiking. The hitchhiker asked for a lift to a place called the Old Beam Bridge, just a few miles down the road. Unsworth was happy to help out. The young man didn't turn out to be the best of companions because all during the ride he recounted in the most gory imaginable detail stories of the accidents that were supposed to have happened at the bridge. Unsworth was happy to see his morbid companion leave once they reached the bridge. A few months later, Unsworth was traveling the same route when he spotted the same hitchhiker at the same spot. Since the young man had not been very pleasant the first time, the truck driver was tempted to pass him by. But Harold Unsworth was basically a kind-hearted fellow, and he knew that the road was pretty deserted and that the hitchhiker might not get a ride for hours. So he stopped his truck, the young man climbed in again, and again said that he wanted to go to the Old Beam Bridge. As before, the hitchhiker's conversation turned to a bloody account of horrible accidents at the bridge. This time when the truck got to the bridge, the hitchhiker said he wanted to go a little farther down the road, but he had to pick up a few things he had left at the bridge. Would Unsworth please wait a moment for him? Now it was late. Unsworth was tired and anxious to finish work and get home. But he was too polite to say anything but, "Sure, I'll wait a moment for you." Unsworth waited and waited, but the hitchhiker never came back. Finally, his patience ran out, and he swore if he ever saw that particular hitchhiker again, he'd just pass him by. Well, he got his second chance about 3 miles later, for there by the side of the road stood the very same hitchhiker with his thumb out. Unsworth couldn't figure out how the guy got up that road so fast, but he knew that he wasn't going to pick him up. So rather than slowing down, he speeded up just to let the fellow know that he wasn't going to get any more rides in that truck. Suddenly, the hitchhiker jumped out in the road and right in front of the truck. Unsworth slammed on the brakes, but there was no way he could stop in time. He was sure that he had hit the hitchhiker, though he didn't feel any impact. Then Unsworth looked in his rearview mirror. He saw the hitchhiker, apparently uninjured, standing in the middle of the road, shaking his fist at him. Plenty of stories like that, hitchhiker stories. Yes, sir.
The Big Joe was basically a song, country song.
Oh, was it?
A song out of it.
Oh, great,
The
great.
lyrics and the story was part of the song.
Wow,
That was
wow,
great.
oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to see that there's some nice ghost stories to go with the haunting stories. And,
Right.
You know, and I equate them sometimes
And
to angelic
It's
and
called Big Joe.
Yep, yep, and they could be I mean, angels have become a popular icon of the 90s, replaced recently by Men in Black. I guess I'll digress a little on Men in Black. Men in Black basically are odd-looking people, pale in complexion. They wear derbies, ties. They walk in rigid formation. They show up at your front door if you've had a UFO encounter. The story actually emerged in 1953. A man by the name of Albert Bender said while he was running a Flying Saucer Society, a group where his friends could get together, he was approached by somebody who was very stern, dressed in black, black tie, came in a black, shiny automobile, and told him that if he ever spoke about UFOs again, something bad would happen to him. Well, these stories repeat themselves. A lot of people, when I was in Gulf Breeze, Florida, they've had Men in Black encounters, believe it or not. People that with this odd complexion, they show up, sometimes they have an odd odor about them, dark glasses, they come in a black car, knock on their door, tell them if they ever talk about UFOs, something bad will happen to them. Naturally, the people tell as many people as they can that they've had these encounters with the Men in Black, and nothing bad ever happens to them. But it's the movie itself wasn't really an accurate depiction of what Men in Black are. Yes?
I had a book on people about that before the movie came out, and it said about the car that they usually drive a Cadillac, and
Yep.
their hair is always kind of strange, like cut, and their voices are either like a monotone or
Right, and you have this electro state, your hair stands on end near them. Now in England,
they always flash an official like FBI or
Exactly.
something before the people can even like tell the FBI what they said.
you know your stuff. And in England, they drive Jaguars. So isn't it interesting where the luxury car in America is what they drive, but in England they drive a Jaguar. So but Men in Black, it's funny that they're idle threats because nothing's ever happened to these people that have told the story as such. Okay, this is a face in the courthouse window. Town of Carrollton in Alabama, Pickens County. The face in the courthouse window has become one of Alabama's most popular spooky sites. And I have photographs of it everywhere last night, couldn't find it. But basically, it looks like the imprint of a face. If you lean up your face against the window, kids, when it's cold out and leaves the imprint, it looks like that. And it comes out during thunderstorms. But basically, this is what happened. On the night of November 16, 1876, the courthouse burned to the ground in one of the largest fires ever seen in that vicinity. Some of the inmates were caught inside, and one of them was Henry Wells. Wells was, when he was arrested, he was returned to Carrollton, and he would stand trial for arson for setting the fire. Anyways, he was eventually executed and hung in the town. And on certain anniversaries, certain days, again during thunderstorms, if you look up from a certain angle, you can see, and people swear back from the 1870s, that his face is imprinted on the window as if he's peering out, waiting to be hung. The day of his hanging, he looked out the window, and it's a very odd image. A Ghost of the Alamo, I'll tell you about this one. March 6, 1836, a massive ground attack by Mexican regulars breached the walls of an old Franciscan mission that was being used as a fortress. The mission was known as the Alamo. Within minutes, the soldiers of General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna swept through the Alamo, killing every armed defender in bitter combat. This ended 13 days of siege. Among the dead were Lieutenant Colonel William Barrett Travis, 26 years old, a quick-tempered lawyer, and the author of impassioned appeals to the outside world. Jim Bowie, 40, commander of the Volunteers, a slave trader, entrepreneur, land speculator, and wielder of the deadly Bowie knife. And Davy Crockett, age 50, world-famous frontiersman, former congressman, and a lively symbol of rough-and-ready America. Santa Anna ordered the 184 dead Texans buried in a mass grave. In the meantime, he prepared to strike out for the north in search of General Sam Houston. Houston was raising an army using the time the Alamo's defenders had fought. The Alamo stood silent, secure in enemy hands, but tradition says that the defenders continued their resistance, even from the grave. It is one of the least known stories connected with the Alamo, and it's an authentic ghost story. The legend is recounted in a 1917 book. See, that's why I like these ancient books. When you're talking about an event at the Alamo in 1836, I would take more credence in a book published in 1917 than 1997, closer to the incident, and you have living sources of information. The 1917 book by Adina de Zavala, titled Histories and Legends of the Alamo and Other Missions in and Around San Antonio, well, de Zavala notes that the story is taken from a folk tale which claims that the incident occurred after Santa Anna's capture at the Battle of San Jacinto, shortly after the fall of the Alamo. Mexican General Andrade ordered the mission razed. Only rubble should remain where the Texans had defied Santa Anna's army. Well, demolition began without incident, but when attention was turned to the walls themselves, ghostly hands protruded from them, brandishing lit torches that sent the Mexican engineers running in terror. Accompanying the flaming torches was a spectral verbal warning: "Depart, touch not these walls. He who desecrates these walls shall meet a horrible fate. Multiple afflictions shall seize upon him, and a horrible and agonizing and avenging torture shall be his death." The tale claims that several relays of engineers sent to demolish the mission were frightened off by the apparitions. Whatever the truth of the story, the Alamo was not demolished. De Zavala wrote, the Alamo was dismantled of its works, guns, etc., the fosse filled up, and the pickets torn up and burned out, but only the single outer walls of the mission square were injured. The man most directly responsible for the destruction of the Alamo's second story, de Zavala noted, was subsequently killed, entombed alive and consumed by flames. As it goes to the Alamo. Well, I might as well tell you some personal stories. I'm one of 8 children. My mom passed away when we were young, and I have older sisters. And we live in this old house in Marshfield as a summer house. My parents moved down there, owned by Fletcher Webster, son of Daniel Webster, the great Massachusetts statesman. A lot of history and lore. The house has been passed down for generations and generations. Anyways, my sisters swear in 1977 that they saw the ghost of my mom at the foot of their bed. They were startled and woken up, the 3 of them sleeping in the same room. Another time, my brother said he looked out the window and he saw a white, glowing thing move across the window. And finally, we had renovations done in the early 1980s where we were going, it was a wood structure, wood foundation, and we had the house lifted up and we inserted a cement foundation. Anyways, the workers encountered strange happenings. Shades would roll up and flap. Lights would turn on. One of the workers, who was also my cousin, swore that he heard somebody say, "Stop what you're doing. Stop what you're doing." And again, my grandfather lived there, my great-grandfather lived there, or whatever. And then they wanted to move out. And my father begged them to complete the job, because they were living in the house. Anyways, they turned the corner on the job, they were finishing up, and they heard, "Good job. Good job." So that's a personal one. Another one, this comes from my brother Joe. We'll tour in Ireland, a little hamlet outside of Belfast. And Ulster has some relatives. My great aunts, who owned, I wouldn't call it a castle, but a mansion on a hill outside of Belfast, used to be IRA supporters, the Republic Army supporters. But anyways, in 1921, they would hide IRA supporters in their basement if the British Tommies were coming into their village. And they would be alerted down by the villagers. They'd light a fire in the center of the square, alerting them to the presence of British soldiers. So anyways, one night, I guess a British Tommy staggered up to the hill alone, on his own, and one of my great aunts shot him dead. Well, story has it, on the anniversary of his death, there's encounters with him. Well, my brother Joe is over there in the mid-80s, and two anomalous circumstances happened. Number one, he had heard footfalls outside the house, and when they got up in the morning, they saw shoe footprints around the house. And another one, this comes from a cousin of mine who's standing over there. He swears that he lifted the shade to a light, and staring right back at him was a World War I soldier, World War I garb, a British Tommy with a pith helmet staring right back into him. So, I mean, those are the only ones that I've had via my family that have been relayed to me. Another war ghost, the Angel of Mons. World War I was a terrible, terrible war. People tend to forget it. They think about Vietnam, Korea, World War II, but World War I was just a heinous act by humanity. They had these new machines, and they decided to go to war, and it was fueled on by Kaiser Wilhelm in Germany. Anyways, in August 23rd, 1943, in Mons, in Belgium, the British Expeditionary Force, led by Sir John French, were being routed mercilessly by von Gluck's First Army as they came thrashing across the plains of Belgium. And what would happen, the French were fighting alongside the British, and the British, especially French, John French, it's going to be confusing with the French army. John French with the British army would pull back and not tell his French counterparts, so that their flank would be left exposed, wide open. So there was a communication gap between the British Expeditionary Force and the French army. Anyways, the French army at Mons decided to pull back quicker than the BEF at this point. And the British were about to be enveloped, enclosed, and routed. And at that very moment that all was lost, when the British were retreating, as the story goes, relayed by a newspaperman and writer of supernatural stories, Arthur Macon, he said that ghosts appeared, bowmen appeared over the British army, hundreds of them over the British army in the clouds with their bows cocked, and the German army fled in terror. Now, a lot of people have said this was just made up by Arthur Machen. Others have relayed information that they actually were at Mons during the battle and saw the apparitions themselves. Some link the bowmen themselves back to that particular area of Mons. Those ghostly archers had joined the British troops during the retreat, and several famous battles have taken place near Mons hundreds of years earlier. Most assume the phantom soldiers were English bowmen from the Battle of Agincourt, 1415. The English won a great victory in that battle, and the story implied that their troops had been given some sort of supernatural aid by ghosts from the past. It was a reassuring tale. And again, the war had just begun. Propaganda was just being born as a vital tool of warfare, so this could have been something that was created by this British writer, and the British public chose to perpetuate it, to keep it ongoing and build into the myth of it. I love Ghosts of the Air story. This was on a show called Mysteries, Magics, and Miracle. And a curator at the Smithsonian Naval the Air Museum down there, says that he came in, and this is back in 1982, he would come in at 5 in the morning to get the main lights up and open up the place, but he swears that he walked in and saw on a B-17, which is a flying forces, that he walked in, he saw an airman trying to climb into the cockpit, he saw another man peering out of a gun hole window, and another man on his knees checking the tires as if they were readying the aircraft for takeoff. There's a famous Twilight Zone episode where a World War I pilot lands on a World War present-day Air Force installation where he flies out of time. Well, that's happened to pilots of World War II who say a British pilot in a Spitfire in 1943 said he was under a thick fog cover trying to get to Portsmouth, lost his bearings, and when he came out of the clouds, he saw this airfield, landed at it, and he said it was just, he couldn't find his map, number one, and number two, there was grassy runway, the buildings were dilapidated, just very ancient and old. He stopped on the ground, waited for the fog to clear, took off, and again he went back to review his maps, and when he talked to his CEO, there was no such airport there, and then they found out it was an aerodrome during World War I. So you have these anomalous ones. 2 women taking a walk in the garden. In France, lovely spring day, and they're walking along a hedgerow, and as they turn the corner, all of a sudden it's Victorian era. People in these like women in lavish dresses, men with fancy hats, and they find this quite odd. A beautiful castle, and they didn't understand what was going on. Suddenly a woman walked by with this look of terror on her face, looked them right in the eye and said, gave them chills and said, "Get out of here now," and walked right by them. And they turned in terror, turned around the hedge, and then when they looked back, it was just a flat field. And when they said that picture, that face, it reminded them of a woman. They couldn't place it. Finally, through a history book, they decided that woman was Marie Antoinette. And they found out that that area was where she lived, in the castle, before it was moved. So you have stories like that. You have another man who with his wife in Sweden, staying in an old inn. And this is, again, 1973. They're staying in an old inn, and they love the decor. It's circa 1500, a straw mattress for beds, and kind of a medieval place, and the travel agent didn't hook them up properly. Anyways, they went to pay their bill to check out the next day, and it was like 3 pennies to stay for 3 nights. And they say, "Sure, I mean, we understand how you got the dark age flavor to it, but we insist, no, that's the going rate." Anyways, they get in their car, drive down the street, and they get into to a gas station miles out, and they tell the gas station attendant about the lovely place they stayed at. And he said, "There's nothing there." And he says, "What are you talking about?" "There's no inn that you're talking about." And he says, "I hear the story." The attendant tells him, "I hear the story all the time. People checking into this hotel. Trust me, lady, there's nothing there." They turn around and go back, and that hotel that they'd stayed wasn't there. So, I mean, you have that where disappearing inns, phantom inns, and whatnot. I want to get into some phantom animals here. Black dogs. Black dogs are often seen. Their traditional beliefs. Anybody that sees a black dog with glowing red eyes, they've always been a portent of evil. You know, there's a bar called the Black Dog on Martha's Vineyard, but black dogs have always been a part of British tradition. People seeing a black dog cross the road and glow at them with these ominous glowing red eyes, and then somebody dies in their family or something horrific happens to them. But here's an encounter. This is something that looked like a Great Dane reportedly stepped in front of a moving car on Exeter Road in Oakhampton, England on October 25th, 1969. Before the driver could stop, the car passed through the animal, which then disappeared. April 1972, a member of Britain's Coast Guard saw a large black hound-type dog on the beach at Great Yarmouth. It was about a quarter of a mile from me, he told the London Evening News. What made me watch it was that it was running, then stopping, as if it were looking for someone. And then as I watched, it vanished before my eyes. There's also something called phantom pterodactyls, where people have seen those, believe it or not. There's plenty of those stories. People actually see these prehistoric beasts, and for some reason they cannot explain them whatsoever. Here's one. This is from January 11, 1976. January 11, 1976, 2 ranch hands near Poteet, just south of San Antonio, Texas, sighted a 5-foot-tall bird-like creature standing in the water of a stock tank. He started flying, Jesse Garcia reported, but I never saw him flap his wings. He made no noise at all. Around the same time, 2 sisters, Libby and Deanie Ford, observed a big black bird near a pond northeast of Brownsville, Texas, which lies along the Texas-Mexican border. It was as big as me, Libby said, and it had a face like a bat. Later, as the 2 girls looked through a book in an effort to identify the creature, they found out what it was. Driving to work on an isolated rural road southwest of San Antonio, Texas, on the morning of February 24, 1976, 3 elementary school teachers saw a shadow cover the entire road. The object responsible for it, passing low overhead, looked like an enormous bird with a 15 to 20-foot wingspan. I could see the skeleton of this bird through the skin or feathers or whatever, and it stood out black against the background of the gray feathers, one of the witnesses, Patricia Bryant, said. And according to David Rendon, another witness, it just glided, it didn't fly, it was no higher than the telephone line. It had a huge breast, it had different legs, and it had huge wings, but the wings were very peculiar. It had a bony structure, you know, like when you hold a bat by the wingtips, it has bones at the top and in between. Never having seen anything remotely like it, they referred to an encyclopedia and identified it as a pterodactyl. So you have these phantom kangaroos. People have reported seeing kangaroos in Kansas, in Arkansas, in Montana. Some people think that they're errant circus animals, escaped circus animals. Well, I've done research, and there's only been 5 circus train wrecks that have occurred in continental United States since P.T. Barnum, the Ringlings. Mr. Bailey had their circuses, 5, and normally the 90% of the animals are captured. Something like 300 animals escape from zoos nationwide annually, and 90% are captured. And even if these animals were to leave the zoo, it's really difficult for them to adapt to the new environment and to mount some sort of viable breeding population. So in other words, I don't really buy the escaped zoo animal theory in as much as I buy the escaped exotic pet theory. A lot of people import animals into this country illegally and then release them into the wild, or they simply escape. But kangaroo sightings have been abundant throughout the Midwest, strangely enough. I want to tell you about some people who just suddenly disappeared. This is a story of a young man's fate at the hands of unearthly forces and has been chronicled for decades. This is Jerome Clark's Unexplained. Christmas Eve, 1889, South Bend, Indiana. Friends and family have gathered for a holiday party. At one point during the evening, Oliver Larch, age 20, sets out to the well to fetch water. It's a clear night, the clouds having passed earlier after dusting the ground with snow. 5 minutes later, horrible screams interrupt the Christmas celebration and everybody dashes outside, where they see Oliver's tracks suddenly disappearing halfway to the well. A voice apparently emanates from the sky, though its source is not visible, and it's screaming, "It's got me! It's got me! Help! Help!" The pathetic pleas fade away after a few minutes, and Oliver Larch is never heard from or seen again. Here's another one, the David Lang, disappearance of David Lang. September 23rd, 1880, David Lang of Sumner County, Tennessee, was crossing a field near his home. His wife was watching him from the porch while his children, George and Sarah, played in the front yard. A Gallatin lawyer, Judge August Peck, and his brother-in-law were approaching in a buggy. Suddenly, Mrs. Lang screamed, and the two visitors gaped in disbelief. David Lang had just vanished in front of their eyes. Extensive searches in the days ahead failed to find a trace of him. Nonetheless, an irregular circle 15 feet in diameter marked the spot of his disappearance for years afterwards. Nothing would grow there, and even insects avoided it. Once the children ventured into the circle and heard their father's tormented voice echoing from another dimension. So that's another one, mysterious, where people just disappear, like Bert from that old show Soap. Here's another one, this is one of my favorites. This is The Devil of Devonshire. February 7th through February 8th, 1855, considerable, this is according to the Times of London, considerable sensation has been evoked in the towns of Topsham, Lipstone, Exmouth, Teignmouth, and Dawlish in the south of Devon, in a consequence of the discovery of a vast number of foot tracks of a most strange and mysterious description. The superstitions go so far as to believe that they are the marks of Satan himself. What they found was a heavy snow had fallen, leaving about 3 inches, but it came down in a very short time over those villages that I mentioned. And they found the next morning, and it was a milkman delivering milk, about these cloven hoof marks, like a horse print, that went down the street, one after another, one after another. They go up the sides of buildings, onto roofs and down. They go across frozen lakes. On one portion there's a river where the river wasn't frozen, and the tracks stopped at the bank of a river and then continued on the other side. And they went on for nearly 30 miles. No one really ever explained the cause of those footprints. They were described as being 3 inches in length and 2.5 inches in breadth, having a small and deeper depression on each side and shaped like a horseshoe. But for that time, illustrators of London News did a follow-up on it, and truly a peculiar story emanating from Devonshire, England. Ghost lights. Ghost lights are strange lights that are seen. Texas has the Lubbock Lights and the Marfa Lights. Some can argue that these are UFOs. Others can say that they're somehow natural phenomena, whether it's the will-o'-the-wisp, St. Elmo's fire, something that's emanated from the tectonic plates. Some people think it's gases released. Yes?
In crop fields, there's supposed to be lights at night, and in Joplin, Missouri, there's a place called Joplin Fields, where there's supposed to be these lights at night.
That's right. Yeah, what else? Tell me some more about that. You know your stuff.
I'm not exactly sure.
Okay.
But this almanac was-
Yep. Yep, the Marfa Lights in Marfa, Texas. That side. Yeah, Joplin Lights. The Yin Lights.
Yeah, and in crop fields, and people see them at night, or saying stuff like that.
Right, and you associated them with crop circles too, right? But there are mysterious lights that have been seen, and again, something that ball lightning has done very strange things. Ball lightnings come right through the front of aircraft, gone right down the aisle, past passengers sitting there and out the back of the aircraft before.
Sometimes, on some airplanes, like when they go to the Bermuda Triangle, but it's not just that, it's in other places too, they experience lights and stuff.
But I think now we're kind of shifting to UFO stuff and Bermuda Triangle, but you're right, there are anomalous lights, and they're not readily explained, which makes them ghost lights, and people like to deem them ghost lights. Has anybody ever seen any strange lights? Okay, great. Has anybody ever experienced any ghost phenomena, paranormal phenomena? Okay. Did anybody did you want to speak about it? Or, yeah.
Oh, well, I was going to ask a question about with all these stories. Now, do you investigate things of this?
The ones that I can, right. But I'm basically an archivist. I've investigated a lot of Bigfoot cases and UFO cases and sea serpent cases, but as far as ghosts, I'm just archiving stories. And like the reason why I'm reading from these stories is because as soon as I break from them and tell you a story, it becomes fourth, fifth, sixth hand, and then you have it as sixth hand. You tell somebody it's eighth hand. So I try to keep it. That's why I wanted to go and get the quotes of the actual participants in the event. But as far as my beliefs concerned, no, my belief is important. What's important is your belief, and I'm here just to relay what's out there. I consider this a distinct literary genre of paranormal phenomena, and it's exploded in the 1990s. But let's face it, paranormal television shows, paranormal movies, paranormal books bring high ratings. People are interested, and they bring money. So people sometimes are in it for money. I'm certainly not. This is just something I've exposed a lot of fraud. The Roswell case, that's another case. But my job here is just to relay the information, get it out there for you to decide. Yes?
I first became interested in the paranormal at the age of 18. I was a sailor on submarines. And I was on a World War II vintage submarine, diesel electrics, which they actually used up until the early 1970s. They were venerable old ships that still were useful for certain purposes. The one I was on was an experimental platform for sonar research, submarine sonar research. And, it was actually built and fuels laid in 1942. And this boat was kept around because the Navy had a lot of nostalgic attachment to it because it was at the Battle of Midway in the Pacific in World War II.
What was the name of the sub?
The Grouper.
Okay, yeah.
And it was forced down to 850 feet. As far as they can tell, it was the deepest diving surviving submarine, American submarine of World War II. A lot of the old admirals still recognize and remember the boats from their war days. And they like to go out on it when they want to collect their submarine pay and whatever, sort of a boondoggle there. But they were still keeping it around and running it. And I came on board in about 1968. And we were out doing research one day. It was that night. We were down about 300 feet, just loafing along at a low speed for whatever technological reasons. We did a lot of that, moving very, very slowly. And I was just going on watch, and a young seaman about my own age. The bunks are stacked up about 5 high, so he was on top bunk, about eye level to me as I walked through the compartment. And he flipped over, and he had a strange look in his face, and he grabbed me right by the shirt. And he said, "You've got to surface. There's a man up there. He's drowning. He's drowning." And this kid was really shaken. You could just see the anguish in his face. And I told him, "Look, we're submerged. We've been submerged for hours. It's impossible. Relax. You're having a nightmare. You're having a nightmare." And he just insisted it was real. It was true. And I said, "Look, you better calm down because they're going to take you off this ship." Guys crack up under certain circumstances. This is a very solid kid. There's nothing new. We've been out for weeks. But I said, "No, get hold of yourself. There's nobody up there." And he was just so shaken about it. I said, "Okay, I'll tell the diving officer. Don't worry about it. I'll tell the diving officer." And he recognized me. He called me by his name. I knew he wasn't listening. I said, "Okay, I'll tell the diving officer," because I was going on watch anyway. And then he just flipped over in his bunk and went back to sleep. We got reading up on the history of the ship, and there was only one man ever killed on that vessel in World War II, and he was indeed left topside and the submarine submerged. And it was at the Battle of Midway.
Wow.
I don't know how this kid could have known that.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am?
I'm sitting here wondering to myself, how do you tell the difference from a ghost and a spirit?
Good question. I certainly can. The only thing you can differentiate is if it's good or bad. And I think that if you encounter a spirit, and if there are people that are tuned into a different wavelength, whether you call them psychics, intuitive. I know I could never pull anything off in front of my mom. She always knew when I was doing bad. I guess it's an innate failing, you know, the difference between ghosts and spirits. I guess a ghost maybe could be a wayward soul that's trapped in this world, some people will say. A spirit being somebody that's not associated with you. It's a very tough question. You can differentiate between good and bad, I think. Evil.
It wouldn't just be one the same?
I guess it would, yeah. I mean, you can differentiate between poltergeists and ghosts. Poltergeists being evil.
What's really the difference between poltergeists and apparitions? Like, they're both like just...
Apparitions, yeah. Well, apparitions, you have banshees. I was going to get to a banshee story, but again, we're pressed for time here. Banshees are like women in white, flowing. Boston Harbor has such a lore of ghosts there. The Scarlet Lady, of these women they're seeing these lovely gowns floating across the field, floating across rocks or the ocean. Cemeteries as well. Resurrection
Chicago.
Mary, yeah, Resurrection Mary. She's the one that's seen at the gate of the cemetery. You drive by and you'll see out of the corner of your eye this woman. Some people picked her up. There's another ghost in Missouri where a beautiful woman where men have danced with her, bought her drinks, and danced with her the whole night only to find that she's a ghost. Wonderful ghost, yes.
But what were you saying that the banshees were?
Banshees, they're crying out. These
like
women.
Apparitions, I keep doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's a good description. Banshees are more animate. They actually emit a noise, a wailing noise. They seem to be moving more, whereas an apparition, like you said, seems to do a routine, whether it's just rattle something or just walk by, less animate.
Like the last thing it did on Earth, it's supposed to keep doing that?
Can't say that. It depends on it differs from case to case. Just as you think you have it figured out, after I've read one, okay, I got to figure it out. I'm sure everybody's thinking. I read another one, then, ooh, what's that? And again, you have to factor in: is this person telling the truth? Are they just embellishing the story? Or there's so many different factions of this phenomenon. I mean, we could debate this all morning. It's very difficult to understand, and like I said, the way you perceive it and the way you translate it, that's what's important, not what I said.
But you said before that a book that's closer to when the event happened is more likely to be like what they're really saying.
I think so, because you're closer to first-hand testimony.
But what if they recovered some stuff that they didn't know at the time? They put it in the book like more recent.
Oh, there are some, yeah, absolutely. There are decent researchers that go back into the archives and find out right. But there are men and women that devote themselves to a particular instance, and they go back and they peruse all newspaper articles and try to put together the scene. You're right. But I like, again, closer to the first-hand source. But I'd like to just move on here. We've got just some more to recover. I want to talk about phantom rock throwers. Okay? People who have reported having their house or garage had objects thrown at them. I investigated a Bigfoot case in Oregon, Ape Canyon, whereby these Bigfoot hunters, they're long passed away. This is 1924, Fred back amongst them, but I had a chance to speak with the grandson. They were mining, and they were in the shack cooking beans late at night, and all of a sudden there was just a shower of rocks. And they get all whooped up. They start firing their guns through the roof. 3 of the 5 prospectors staying there claim that they saw these man-beast anthropoids, these hairy giants on top, bang, or whatnot. But there's been other people that, I talked to John Keating, a friend of mine, Eastern Ohio Bigfoot Investigation Center, who investigated a phantom rock throwing his house in Ohio, where about 5 o'clock at night, all of a sudden a rain of stones would come down on the house. Well, come to find out, Don found out it was neighborhood kids. He caught them with rocks in their pocket. So, here's one. December 1983, Detective Rogo investigated an in-progress stone-throwing episode in Arizona. The target was a house being built on the far reaches of Tucson's northeast side in an essentially rural area. Events had begun the previous September and in time became daily occurrences. In the early stages, the rocks landed on the rooftop, but they soon escalated in frightening proportions. The missiles would start striking the house in brief flurries. 5 or so rocks would strike the front of the house or the family's van at 2 or 3 second intervals. There would then be...
TV.
What are you laughing at? I don't see anything. What's your name? You're the next speaker? Is this the next speaker? I guess I'm running short on time. I guess you're up next. It's a keynote speaker here. He's a young man. He's 27 years old.
Four. Why are you over here?
Why don't you want to take a seat?
Why
Okay?
don't you sit down? Why don't you sit down? Here, I'll give you a seat.
My first heckler of the morning. The missiles would start striking the house in brief flurries. 5 or so rocks would strike the front of the house or the family's van at 2 or 3 second intervals. There would then be a brief hiatus of about 5 to 15 minutes, and then another flurry would begin. Sometimes these rocky barrages would be somewhat sporadic and brief, but on other occasions the attacks would go on for 2 or 3 hours. In early November, the family contacted the sheriff's office, and in the next month, police agencies conducted surveillance of several kinds, including covert. Not even the affected family members were aware of the observers. There are also repeated aerial searches. Nothing could stop the bombardment, however, and law enforcement officers, reporters, professional trackers, and curiosity seekers in their vehicles were struck with uncanny regularity and accuracy, even in the deep darkness. The stones appear to be coming from the brush that surrounded 3 sides of the house. But as Rogo found out, when he experimented, the stone thrower could not have thrown projectiles through the brush itself, which was too thick. He would have to have stand and throw over it. Yet even when the flashlight and search beams bathed the brushy area as the stones sailed towards their targets, no one was seen. After December 7th, the stone throwing stopped. You get cases like that that appear. Massachusetts ghost ships. Palatine lights off the coast of Rhode Island. People have reported over the last few years a ship called the Palatine caught on fire and burnt at sea, burned right down to the water line. And every once in a while, around November, people in Rhode Island will report, whether it's in Narragansett Bay or in the Atlantic, seeing this burning glow out in the ocean. Numerous captains of ships throughout the years, from the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, and not as much into the 20th century, have reported coming upon these odd sailing vessels, these sloops, schooners that are unmanned, that nearly are on a collision course with them, and they veer off at the last second, turn around, the ship's gone. A Flying Dutchman is a very famous one. The Charles Haskell. I want to tell you about the Charles Haskell. Charles Haskell was involved in a sea collision with some vessels, the Clara Sylvia, and also the Grampus. Anyways, when they had these collisions, men were lost at sea, and the Charles Haskell made it into port safely. Anyways, members of the Haskell refused to sail on it again because they're highly superstitious lot, sailors are. And the captain, Joe Enos, was forced to, Captain Curtis rather, was forced to get a new crew. So anyways, Captain Curtis gets Joe Enos, George Winters, and George Scott. And Joe Enos had the night deck watch. On the 6th day, they were out at the Georges Bank fishing grounds. Believe it or not, they were still taking advantage of the Georges Bank fishing grounds way back in 1869 when this event happened. Anyways, just after midnight, Enos reports, Harry grabbed me and pointed to the bow. We saw a group of men in oilskins, dripping wet, just standing there. They ain't our boys, said Harry. Then we saw more appear, climbing over the rail from the starboard side. They were like shadows, the shape of men. Go wake the skipper, I told Harry, but he didn't move. They're coming aft, he said, and sure enough, they began stationing themselves along the deck, baiting hooks and paying no attention to us. We retreated to the wheel hole and swore to each other that we'd keep quiet about what we were seeing. As we approached Gloucester Harbor, Joe Enos says, the fishermen left our ship and marched over the water towards Salem. Next time, we're going to bring those fellas back to Salem before we come to Gloucester, said Joe. So you'll have encounters like that. All right, is there a pharmacist here? In kids, candy, when you have candy, you want to make sure that you don't have too much sugar. Like us adults with caffeine, we go nuts. Haunted Islands of Boston Bay, as I was telling you about. Again, we're running short on time here. I want to talk about the Scarlet Woman. Okay, and this is a woman, Hull, Massachusetts. She came to Hull, Massachusetts in May of 1862. She was from South Carolina. Her accent was unmistakable. And, her husband, actually, I'm going to give you the abbreviated version. There's been encounters with the Scarlet Woman for years. Her name's Mary Burton, and with her husband William, she was escaping Boston from the British Army on March 17, 1776, Evacuation Day. Well, anyways, as she was setting out, Mary hated to leave her beloved Boston, and as fate would have it, even though her ship was sailing out of the harbor, she would never leave. While standing on the deck in a striking scarlet dress, a cannonball grazed the ship's rigging, and a dagger-like splinter of wood from the mast speared her head. She fell to the deck in a swoon. At first, William, her husband, thought she had just fainted, but then he saw the blood streaking through her hair and staining her dress. She opened her eyes for a moment and then died in his arms. Well, people have reported seeing this Mary Burton, the Scarlet Woman. 1804, Captain of the Margaret says that he saw, looking at one of the Boston Harbor Islands, the ruins of Fort Strong, he saw a ghostly female form dressed in red. William Liddell, stationed at Long Island in Boston Harbor, 1891, as a sentry reported saying, "She came towards me from the easterly," he said, "over the hill by the fort, and her moaning and wailing were quite distinct." Here's a banshee for you. Here's men building the bridge that now connects Long Island with the mainland at Squantum. Reported seeing the lady in red in summer 1951 during a heavy rain squall. It's interesting, when there's fog or rain, it seems that ghost ship apparitions are more prevalent, and sea ghosts, whether they be ghosts of lighthouse keepers, which there's a lot of tradition of, or the Scarlet Woman in red. One second, honey, I just want to read this and we'll go right to that. Anyways, here's 5 or 6 of us, this is according to Jack Lavery, 5 or 6 of us saw her just about sunset, trembling like a mirage, all in red, like she was glowing and on fire, but she had long yellowish hair and drifted across the hill, like she was on a mission of some sort. She was about 50 yards away from us, and I wasn't scared or nothing, but thought it to be an interesting experience. I never saw another ghost before or since. What you want to say?
There's 2 songs I know. There's a song I know about Flying Dutchman by Lance Massey, and there's a song I know about Lady in Red.
Christopher.
Yeah.
Is that song really about the Lady in Red, a ghost?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Huh, interesting. Interesting. Of course, on Boston, Alan and I were speaking about this. There's tradition of pirates here. In fact, I might as well plug that museum. But New England Pirate Museum is open now in Salem. It's a good take for kids. But there's tradition of pirates here, and with that comes ghosts. And Nix's Maid was a monolith in Boston Harbor that was, at one point, was elevated on an island. And since the ice caps are melting now, the water is up to a certain level. Anyways, they used to hang pirates' heads out on this little promontory to ward off and warn other pirates. This is what will happen to you if you commit piracy in Boston Harbor. But there are ghosts of pirates. A ghost of Captain Green is allegedly seen out on one of the Boston Harbor Castle Island. Captain Green is supposedly seen in numerous other phantom ships throughout the world. And interesting phenomena. Lighthouse keepers are seen. There's one minute light in Scituate. Anybody heard of that? Apparently there's some sort of apparition that occupies that. But, this is a demon cat. Okay, back to some demons. This is again this is the U.S. Capitol building. We have ghosts in the White House and we have ghosts in the Capitol, which is why nothing's getting done. The U.S. Capitol building, with its enormous dome, is the most famous and easily recognizable building in the United States. Construction began in 1793. Part of it was completed 7 years later, and Congress moved in. Deep in the Capitol basement is the area which the catafalque, Alan, what's the pronunciation on that? Catacombs. It's been changed. The catacombs are a raised platform on which the caskets of dead presidents or others who have been given a state funeral in Washington are placed for the period in which the body is on display in the Capitol Rotunda. The catacomb storage area is said to be home of Washington's most alarming specters, the demon cat. About a century ago, the Capitol was overrun with mice and rats. Cats were kept just to hold down the rodent population. As the numbers of rodents decreased, so did the number of cats. Today there is only one very unusual cat left. It's called a demon cat, or sometimes DC. Encounters with DC have been reported for many years by those whose job is to patrol the Capitol corridors at night. This phantom appears only at night and only when the victim is alone. Sometimes the encounter is fairly benign. Just seeing a large black cat walking along a dimly lit subterranean corridor where no real cat could possibly be can be unsettling. Then there are times when a meeting with a demon cat can be far worse. One guard, who didn't want his name to be used, told of a meeting in D.C. in the early 1970s. It was a chilly January night, and as the guard walked through the corridor, he saw the figure of a large black cat walking toward him. The apparition seemed to be actually growing in size as it got closer. As the guard stared into the creature's glowing red eyes, he became paralyzed with fear. Unable to move, he watched it swell to the size of a huge tiger. The meowing changed to a roar. Then the animal crouched and sprang with claws extended. Well, the terrified guard closed his eyes, said a prayer, and thought he had only had a few more painful moments to live. But nothing happened. When he was able to open his eyes again, the guard found that the beast had vanished without a trace. He only told his closest friends. Some who have encountered the demon cat have fainted or run screaming down the corridor. When they tried to bring back others to witness what they had seen, the creature invariably disappears. One old guard is said to have had a fatal heart attack brought on by the appearance of demon cat. There's a couple more, you guys, and then we'll do a Q&A. And this is about the Provincetown Phantom. And basically, I'll just give you a synopsis of it. They call it the Black Flash. It's some sort of entity, looks like a man that jumps out from behind bushes and scares people. First seen in 1938. For many autumns and winters thereafter, that solitude was disturbed. It was a giant monster, said some. A swift-footed fiend, said others. A phantom, said Police Chief Rogers. Police Sergeant Frank Marshall called it the Black Flash, and the name stuck. He used to pop out of the sand dunes in October evenings, an elusive Superman, a superhuman leaping lizard dressed in black, all in black. He was only a rumor at first, described to parents by frightened children who had seen him there on the dunes near the outskirts of town. It was in the second week of November, however, when he first came bounding right into downtown Provincetown. Maria Costa was the first to be confronted by him on Commercial Street. It was dusk, and she was about to cross the street to the coffee shop when out of the corner of her eye she spotted something or someone lurking in the shadows. The phantom jumped out at her, quick like a rabbit, and then Maria, who froze in panic, tried to scream, but no sound came out of her mouth. He hovered so close to her that if she dared, she could have reached out and touched him. He was all black, with eyes like a ball of flame, and he was real big, said Maria. Well, there's some other encounters here, and it's interesting, the way that this type of creature manifests itself within a region. West Virginia has the Mothman, a very similar creature to this, glowing red eyes, hovering. London has the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack, who was supposedly a superhuman being, would jump out in front of people, scare the lights out of them, and then run away. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon, Arkansas. Allegedly a man was getting people sick by putting some sort of hypnotic gas. But something like that where they have some sort of poltergeist or mythic demon seems to perpetuate itself in different regions around the world, and there's been a lot of tradition of that. I know we're running short on time here, Alan. I'm just going to wrap up just a couple.
Don't worry about it.
Okay. This is one, I'll show you a picture, Mysteries of the Unexplained, Reader's Digest, one of my favorite books. I got into paranormal phenomena in 1989. This is my first book. This is about the SS Watertown, okay? December 1924, 2 crew members of the SS Watertown, a large oil tanker, were overcome by fumes while cleaning one of the cargo tanks and died. The Watertown was en route from the west coast of the United States to Panama, where the accident happened, and the 2 men, James Courtney and Michael Meehan, were buried at sea on December 4th, 1924. On December 5th, the first mate told Captain Keith Tracy that the faces of Courtney and Meehan were seen floating in the sea, appearing and disappearing. They were keeping pace with the Watertown. During the rest of the journey to Panama, the faces following alongside were observed by every man on board. When the Watertown docked at New Orleans, Captain Tracy related the story at a meeting with the officials of the city's services company. It was suggested that it might be possible to photograph the faces. When the Watertown set sail again, the faces reappeared, and 6 photographs were taken. 5 showed nothing unusual, but in 1, the 2 faces were clearly visible. The negative was checked for evidence of fakery and fraudulence by Burns Detective Agency and passed all scrutiny. Here's the photograph taken from the deck of the Watertown that seems to reveal 2 haunting faces in the water below. They are the likenesses, crewmen claim, of the 2 seamen who died in the accident of the ship. those photographs for you. Oh, I'm gonna end with this one, okay? I'm getting a little parched here, and I'd like to have questions and answers. And again, I just touched on some of them. As you know, and I'm sure you've all heard or had heard stories. So there's just a vast amount, and it makes you think that are we just physical, or is there an afterlife? And you know, I know what my personal belief is, and I don't have to force it upon you, but it's a remarkable world in which we live. Again, go back to that. We have to understand that we may not be able to understand. But okay, here's a good one. This is the ghost bus of Ladbroke Grove. I was turning the corner and saw a bus tearing towards me, the motorist testified before the police. The lights of the top and bottom deck, and do you know what a lorry is? It's a double-decker bus. We're talking about this bus here, okay? A lorry, all right? That's what we're talking about. The lights of the top and bottom deck and the headlights were full, but I could see no sign of crew or passengers. I yanked my steering wheel hard over and mounted the pavement, the sidewalk, scraping the roadside wall. The bus just vanished. The motorist who made this report to the local authorities in North Kensington, London in the mid-1930s may have been drunk, hallucinating, or dreaming at the wheel when he had the accident. But if he was, so were hundreds of other motorists who complained of being forced off the road by a phantom red bus careening around the corner from St. Mark's Road into Cambridge Gardens near the Ladbroke Grove underground station. After one fatal accident, the local coroner took evidence of the apparition and discovered that dozens of local residents claimed to have seen the spectral double-decker. In fact, there had been many other ordinary incidents, some of them very fatal, at the notorious junction. Eventually, the local council straightened the road there, and the accident rate was greatly reduced. Thereafter, there were no reports of a ghostly red bus. Research showed that in 1922, a red lorry crashed at the same exact spot at Ladbroke Grove, killing 13 passengers. So, let's see stuff. Does anybody have any questions here? And, yes? You're going to have to lecture with me because you know so much.
You know how your job is to go look for paranormal activities? That's like help understand what's going to happen in the afterlife, or is that just like to find out stuff like that?
Well, it's struck a chord that's kind of personal, but I think it's mind candy. I always shake my fist at some astronomers. When I was your age, they told me the universe was 4 billion years old. Today they're telling me it's 25 billion years old, so I've aged 21 billion years in about 20 years, and I'm just getting a little gray. They make these scientists, it's an ever-growing business, but it's very subjective. They tend to look this way. Unless you give me concrete evidence, I'm not going to believe. I'm not even going to take time to listen to it. Anthropologists and archaeologists, they're finding ancient primitive humans and younger dinosaurs. Maybe at the time they'll put humans on the earth with dinosaurs. I often say that archaeology, I could go out and bury a box of Colonel Sanders fried chicken bones, and in 10,000 years, some fool's going to dig them up and build a dinosaur out of them. So I see science as very subjective. In other words, the subjects that I'm taught in school, I need to know. History is very important. Science is very important. Mathematics is very important. English is very important. But paranormal, this stuff's been avoided by mainstream education, mainstream intelligentsia, and I use that term lightly. People have neglected this. I'm saying this is something to be looked at. People are saying they're seeing UFOs. Some people say they see Bigfoot. Some people seeing what other people are seeing ghosts. Some people have psychic powers, and nobody's really dedicated any time to research. So I think I'm a paranormal grandstander. I get on my soapbox and orate about it. But if I can turn on and touch more people and let them know that, hey, this world that we live in, this life is much more magical than you think. And regardless of your religion, we all point in the same direction towards one deity. And all I'm saying is, people say, how can you believe this happened and still believe in God? That, to me, makes my God that much more grander, that's all. But I think it's a very special life that we have, and there's more things than we can understand. And that maybe we should be much better. That maybe there is a metaphysical part of us, a soul, and a physical part. And then when our body dies, we really don't die. We go on in some sort of plane that you and I can't understand.
But when you go
I dodged that one nicely, didn't I?
When you go on like a case, do you keep like a skeptical mind, but you're but an open mind? Or
Yeah,
you just,
yeah. I want to believe, okay? I've never seen a UFO, I've never had anything remotely, and I want to believe, okay? In my heart I believe, in my mind I don't, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. What was your second part of your question?
when you go to investigations, do you ever test to see, like, if they might be hallucinating?
Oh, absolutely.
and
A
stuff?
classic example of Roswell, New Mexico, when I was down there this past July, I've been twice, there was a man who said he was from the planet Zeitoun. Okay, and he just told me about where he came from and this, and the man was mad. And then there was another fellow who said he was blinded by a UFO, and these dark sunglasses on, and he said he had contact with beings. So I'm talking with him for a few minutes. I want to get away, so I drop $1 on the ground, and I'm walking away, and I look, as I look, he picks it up. So he, you know what I'm saying? He said he got blinded. So there are people that lie. When I was at Gulf Breeze, it's supposed to be the UFO hotspot in America, not in the world. Mexico is right now. And I'm sitting there watching. They all sit at these picnic benches and just sit there. It's a very pleasant night, and you know, you drink your sodas and you talk about that. And one woman was saying the UFOs aren't going to come out because you're here. I said, well, that's pretty mean for you to say, because you don't believe. I said, that doesn't matter if I believe or not. But when a woman says, oh, look at that, and I know it's an aircraft, I can just see it. And then a man goes, oh, did you see? Look at that light bobbing over the water, and it's the light on the mast of a boat rocking back. And then another person saying, I saw these red lights just straight to the east of Santa Rosa Island. And the next night I went out and I said, wait a minute, I'm looking at those red lights too. They're car tail lights. There's a little road that goes out on the beach. So I have to use that skeptical mind. I happen to know Pensacola. There's many military bases around, highest concentration of military airfields in the world, and that can account for some of the traffic. Yes.
Yeah, my son took them on the air base, and they had a museum there.
Which base? Eglin Air Force Base you talking
No,
about?
no, this was for the Army.
Where?
This was down in Georgia. And outside, they had all these various vehicles, you know, from like a helicopter to a jet, you know. And then they had what we typically think of as a flying saucer with the roundness, with the lights around there. And so I took a picture. And then I took a picture of the legend, and the legend said that back in 1952, a Major so-and-so, I can't remember the name right now, had perfected this so that the metal, stress of the metal would something or all that kind of stuff. But anyway, and it said that he was able to go 2.5 feet off the ground. So I'm figuring that if they could do that back in 1952, we sure as hell do have UFOs. It's just that they might be ours.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want to digress on UFOs, but consider this. In 1903, Orville and Wilbur fly. 65 years later, we're bouncing around the moon. If you look at, we have nuclear-powered ships, nuclear-powered submarines, nuclear-powered satellites. So perhaps we are at the end of our tether as far as fossil-fueled aeronautica is concerned. What I mean by that is we've gone as fast as we possibly can go with gasoline or alcohol-type propellants. And if you look at the way aviation's exploded, again, the SR-71, you can go to Lens Crafters and get your glasses done, and the SR-71 can take off from Langley, Virginia. By the time your glasses are done, the SR-71 is landing in Los Angeles. You can cross country in an hour, in about an hour. So if you look at the way we've gone exponentially, they're building now a single-stage to-orbit vehicle that can go potentially Mach 15, which is 15 times the speed of sound. So whereas automobiles progress arithmetically, aviation has gone up this way. And not bad, I love the Air Force and the government, but usually when the government says one thing, here's their real agenda. And if you deal with that premise, you're okay, and I have no problem with the government. Yes, ma'am?
Do you know anything about Denmark, Maine?
Denmark, Maine?
Yeah.
No.
Hysterical. It was, and it was funny, I was sitting at lunch, you know, I was at my school myself, and they're very strict and don't approve of those. But my family was quite Irish, and we think a lot about God. And I looked out the window and I saw this man hanging from a tree. He was a very young boy, about 14. He was dressed in very old-fashioned clothes. And of course I didn't say anything. And so I went home, and about 3 weeks later my mother said, she would never go to Denmark, Maine. And I said, aha, you saw a ghost. You know, and I had never mentioned it to anyone before. But my mother's blind. And so of course she couldn't see the ghost, but she said she would never go back. But my daughter said, why? And my daughter had seen, we looked out the window at the same time, and had seen a man standing at the bottom of the tree, looking up at the tree, and that's all she saw. He was very, very old, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and he was crying. And he tried to investigate it because some strange things have happened and I've been deceased.
Well, but my research has shown that if you look at that particular description, people sometimes find somebody was murdered or their life was taken away from them before their time came. And to me, again, total speculation was that the kid committed suicide and that was a grieving father, looking at the tree maybe once removed. But yes?
I think, it's interesting, and I wonder if, I think that it seems to be, well, when you mentioned about Irish, I'm Scottish, and the Celts seem to have this real rich tradition of ghosts. And
Absolutely.
And my grandmother, who grew up in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, would tell stories, and my mother would always tell her not to scare us. But my mother, who's a real skeptic and somebody who's, doesn't want to even talk about these sorts of things, had a very strange thing that I was able to manage to get out of her. Happened to her just about a year ago, and she was lying in her bed, and she had a terrible headache, and she couldn't fall asleep, and she said she was clearly awake, and she turned to her right and saw herself and my grandmother, much younger, sitting caressing her head.
Wow.
And she was completely freaked out, as anybody would be. How could she see herself? And why was her mother there? Clearly a lot younger than when she died. And I said, well, Mom, this is something that I've read about that's called astral projection. And of course she said she was clearly awake. And it's changed her, because now, she's always been a skeptic, never wanted to hear these stories because that was old, from the old country, and wanting to be a modern person, wanting to disengage herself from that. This thing happening to her has in some ways changed her. But I wonder if you could speak on astral projection.
Yeah, well, astral projection, teleportation, near-death experience, out-of-body experience, there are different phenomena, but whereby there's a separation of soul and body. There are men and women that can claim that they can, if at night, the soul leaves their body and they can visit a friend in Los Angeles. I can tell you a story that took place in 1956, where a test pilot was there with his trainer. He's testing this aircraft, and his trainer, sergeant behind him is training him. And he looks out the window and he sees a plane identical to his, and the guy looks just like him. Salutes him, and the guy salutes right back. He goes to talk to the sergeant. The sergeant looked out there, and it's gone. I mean, you have these encounters. I know in 1979, I was coming out of the music hall in Boston, the Wayne Center, and I'm walking out, and as I looked to my right, I saw myself. Well, that's odd. And so I went to a concert a couple months later, and what I had seen is there's a mirror on the corner of it that if you walk by just at the same time, it's weird. It projects yourself back to it. So that was my own encounter. But people say that they can leave. I did a speech here for Alan, out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences. They're right about to die. They see themselves lying on the ground or on an operating table, and they see a peaceful, tranquil white light, and then somebody says your time isn't here yet, or they meet a loved one and they're sent back into their body. There are other people that claim that they can force themselves out of their body. You have strange strength cases where people, a child sees a father, a car collapse on his father, or a 7-year-old child. There's documented cases. Robert Ripley has a lot of these, believe it or not, where the child actually lifts up the car so the father can be pulled to safety. So. Again, we strayed. Ghosts is such, Alan, I guess this is just such a random topic. You can really talk about anything. There are people in Gulf Breeze, for instance, that tell me that aliens, the reason why I wouldn't see them is, number one, I had my video camera out, and I had to sit with, this is what they made me. They made me sit with my back to Pensacola Bay. With maybe put my video camera away and I had my little snapshot that I could pull out quicker than Billy the Kid could pull a 6-shooter, you know what I'm saying? I'm going to take pictures, and I say, okay. And I'm recording it all with interviews, and some of these people, what they believe is their own set of beliefs, and who am I to denounce them? But when they try to force it on you, it becomes religious. It smacks of religion. They try to shake it into you, and like, that's not your gig for me to tell you, just because you believe they're beings of light, a different dimension. And I do think there are people who are gifted. I know, ma'am, you've had other occurrences, haven't you? Okay, and just in sense of people that have had these occurrences, they tend to be tapped into some sort of line. And I've just seen too many people personally, and I know a lot of intuitive women It's a gift. And there are, I call some of the psychics, those phone psychics, I call them prophets for profits. They're bogus. You're going to meet somebody nice, the man of your dreams, you're going to be wealthy. Isn't that what I dream of anyways? You know, they're going to say you're going to get hit by a car, you're going to be financially ruined, you're going to gain weight, things don't look good. Come on, stop it. So you got to watch out for psychics. There are some very good ones, and there are and perhaps again they're tapping into a different dimension. Anybody have a good ghost story that they actually saw a ghost?
Not a real ghost story, but for a short period of time, I was a detective at the Parker House in Boston, and I assume you heard of the Parker House ghost. But I worked with some middle-aged men there, and I was waiting for them to tell me about the joke about the ghost. And they said, no, it's not a joke. And they'd been working there a number of years, and it seems that one of the people who rented one of the rooms in the Parker House, and this has been going on for quite some time, whenever they rented out that particular room, that they would, not all the time, but infrequently, someone would complain about the ghost in the room. So as of right now, I don't know if they rent out that particular room. They may have shut it up.
Stories like that are so frequent. Hotels with a guest that won't check out, okay? That's checked out but won't check out. Dedham Hilton, does anybody know where that, 128 East Buchanan Street? Okay, let me tell you a quick story. Let me get it straight. Again, it's fourth-hand testimony. That's why I like to read it. Before that Hilton was built, it was a gravel pit. Well, story has it that in 1965, a young man plummeted to his death, went sailing right out there, as Jonathan Winters would say, and crashed his car, died in a car wreck. His parents eventually moving out of Dedham, Massachusetts, somewhere down south. Hilton is built. Room 213, second floor. One of the guys that works there, a friend of mine, Paul, who worked there, said that he had an encounter where he closed his car door, looked up to 213, and in the window he saw this kid with a red t-shirt on and jeans looking out. So he went in, told people, and they said, no. First of all, the 213 is closed. We've had all sorts of problems with the heat, we've had problems. We don't rent out 213, there's nobody in 213. Anyways, story has it that phone bills started piling up and accumulated for room 213. And they looked at the phone number, and the people at Hilton called the phone number, and it was the dead boy's parents now living down south. And they called them up and said, yeah, we've been getting some strange phone calls anyways for the past years. People help me, I miss you, odd things, and we've been tormented with these crank phone calls for so long. It's good to see that the source can be. And anyways, they disconnected all telephones from 213. The phenomena continued. That was back in 1991, last time I heard about that. But you do hear stories of these ancient hotels with an occupant in it, older houses. A lot of culture happened there. A lot of families grew up with the tradition. But fascinating story. Doesn't surprise me. Nothing surprises me anymore. And I think my biggest problem with the UFO community, and again I don't want to digress, is a mass is quick to defend its prized possession. That's its ignorance, and they embrace it. And in UFO is just like government branches. I've got a secret I'm not going to tell you. Well, I've got a secret I'm not going to tell you. And the CIA comes up and says, I got secrets on both of you. Tell me what you know. You know. And in the UFO communities, there are some people that don't believe in abductions. There's some people that only believe in close encounters of the first kind, sighting discs. Some think that they're unoccupied. They're so factionalized, and that's why I say no. You have to embrace the guy who says he's from Zeitoun. Okay, a being of light, to the person who saw that strange light in the sky. Don't know what it was, but I saw it for 3 seconds. You have to embrace all of it and then discard it one at a time. You just can't reject it out of hand. Some of the stories I told you here today, I've got to investigate personally before I can say that's not true. I've spoken with people that have had such strange occurrences, and they speak to me with such glowing sincerity, and I can pretty much read a person. See if they're lying, and I will lead them astray with leading questions, and they pass my credibility test. And as a paraskeptic, I have to walk away. It's like in Ohio, this guy says he's seen a 9-foot-tall albino sasquatch. Ooh, I get him in my crosshairs, I'm going out there tomorrow. I spoke out there, he's a friend of mine, I've known him for 3 years, Don Keating. He's as honest as the day is long. I got some other pieces of footage. I just produced this documentary, as a matter of fact. I wanted him to show me some other pieces of footage that he had, and he was very reluctant, and he showed me, and it shows this white thing ambling along the side of a lake, about 10 feet tall, glowing white, and shows the Sasquatch researchers they're looking for footprints, and meanwhile the sucker's walking along the corner of the lake. And I'm saying, you got to put this out, Don. I know you're not, by the way, let's get this out on the market. So he submitted it to Sightings of Strange Universe, so that's going to air nationally in just a few weeks. Another friend of mine, Scott Harriet, comedian, has had an encounter with Bigfoot. He's been on Ancient Mysteries, Sightings, Paranormal Borderline. Well, he went up to this crevasse, and there had been Bigfoot sightings, and they seen this thing with 2 red eyes glowing at him. He said as soon as he stepped forward, the eyes lit up. Now, Scott's a comedian, and just the way he tells it with such conviction, I mean, who am I to say? But inversely, there's a woman called Frankie Rowe, one of the Roswell witnesses. If anybody's familiar with the Roswell story, she's the woman that cries. You remember talking about how they came military and threatened me if I ever saw her? Well, to me, I've done stage acting. I said, she's acting, okay? There's one thing, consistency does not mean veracity. I look at that as dialogue. Anybody can spout dialogue time and time and hit your cues, rolling down. I've been on stage with some good people, and I said, I'd like to act opposite her. So I went down there, first question is, I said, you acted in New York, was it? And she goes, oh no, I was an actress in Missouri. So, gotcha. You know, and so I don't accept her testimony. It's too consistent, believe it or not. I mean, the tear rolls down. I've seen 8 separate interviews where the tear rolls down almost on cue. It's too consistent. You're too good. You're spouting dialogue. Then there's Glenn Dennis, the mortician, for instance, in Roswell, who says that he glimpsed inside 3 vans and saw alien debris, walked into a hospital, and a nurse came running out and said, Glenn, you have to get out of here, because they were doing alien autopsies, and he said he could see into the back of 3 vans. Well, I walked up to the Roswell Army Hospital, and I know the dimensions of vans, and he would have to have the peripheral vision of Magic Johnson or better to see down the line like this with 3 vans. I mean, there's no way he can tell me that he could have looked in 3 vans. So you've got to look at people's consistency. A lot of people will say things to appease publishers, to get book deals, to get lectures, or appear on television. So like Roswell, there's so many holes in it. They can't decide which flying saucer crash this place happened, whether it's Corn Ranch or Boy Scout Mountain. Each are charging $15 admission. Each are supported by 2 separate museums. Each, though, by one man who signed 2 sworn affidavits saying it was over here. He took $8,000 from one museum. Then on his deathbed, and I hate deathbed confessions, said, oh, I made a mistake. It's Boy Scout Mountain. I swear to God, that's true too. Where's the 13 grand? Stop it. There's no, the only thing that came down of Roswell was a pile of bowl cookies. That's not to say there wasn't a flying saucer crash, but again, you have to say there's been no flying saucer crashes or there's been an entire litany. And it's time to quit Roswell and time to stop beating up on the Air Force and the Army. If there's been a cover-up, you know, this has been for good reason. You know, I mean, you got to look at the Air Force wants to perpetuate the myth of invulnerability and invincibility. And moreover, there are economic concerns. We saw what happened to when H.G. Wells, Orson Welles broadcast War of the Worlds, how there was panic. But there are economic concerns. We see how volatile stock markets are. And they can plummet. Look what happened in Hong Kong one day. But more importantly, remember this, the reason why the Air Force does not want to let you know is because that would delete line items in their budget. Next congressional hearing. You mean there's UFOs? You can't do anything about it? Oh, nope, no more SR-71. Oh, B-2, gone, scratch that. Oh, no more F-117. Up. We're going to close that base, that base. You think there's been a reduction now, so they're protecting their own. But that's why I said leave the Air Force alone, let them do their job. Yes, ma'am?
Oh, I'm wondering, who's to say just like this life on this planet, there's life on other planets, so why should it be so strange? You know, as we label them aliens, they could label us aliens ourselves. We're not the only living
That's right.
in this world.
The argument, and I'm sorry and I may offend people by saying this, but the argument that I believe there's life elsewhere but they haven't visited here, to me is invalid. You're at a point now where you have to say there's no other life in the universe, or there is, and they've come here, they visited, they're in our skies, and they have been for eons. I can't take that, just like the agnostic belief. Either you believe or you don't. I don't like the Wallendas, as I call them, Carl Wallendas, that walk the tightrope. You can't have it all. Now, I can, if it's a game of semantics, I can argue there's no such thing as Japan. I've never been to Japan. My dad has. He's a good guy, I love him, but he may be lying, right? I mean, if you want to play that. I've never seen UFOs, so I can say that they don't exist, but if I look at the evidence, and I've seen some of the footage, you know, I look at Independence Day, the movie ID4, fueled by a $30 million production engine. That is the most sophisticated man-made or person-made UFO footage. Why is it I see more convincing footage coming from farmers in Africa, from a Mexican politician, from a lawyer in Des Moines, Iowa? This troubles me. As a skeptic, I then stand down. I don't have an answer for that, just like my friend in Ohio's Bigfoot. Don't know. you're not going to get bashed by me. A Roswell I can attack, and the same is with Loch Ness. I talked with so many credible witnesses. I know that Loch Ness, for instance, with the weather conditions, it could be sunny on dories on one side of the loch. Across the loch, it could be a downpour with 5-foot swells. I have a school of fish foraging at the surface of Loch Ness, and it looks like humps. So I had a hump sighting, but I knew exactly what was happening, and I videotaped it. So it's all, I guess, in the eye of the beholder.
You mentioned Edward Rose Snow. Did you come across that ghost story about it, the lady in black?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious what you thought of it.
Well, Edward Rose Snow was great. He took liberties and license. Very creative man, a keeper of the tradition of New England, old New England. Yeah, he recounts a story, and again, it's in Boston Harbor. The islands are laden with ghosts. Again, these were fortresses and prisons. People were in prison and left to die there. So if you were to follow the equation of how ghosts exist, if there are people that were seized or were tormented, then that would fit in with the picture. But Edward Rose Snow has, there have been sea serpents. Gloucester, 1803, there was a sea serpent, Nellie they called it, that reared its ugly head in Gloucester Harbor. It's something anomalous washed up. I remember listening to this on the radio when I was a young child. Situate, 1969. Man's Beach, some sort of anomalous carcass washed up. It looked like a sea serpent, but they called it a basking shark. Now, that was no basking shark, and I knew that at age 9. I guess that's where the flame started. But Edward Rose Snow, I had read as a young child. I was into Star Trek, and that's, I guess, what perpetuated my interest in the paranormal. Another thing, I'm investigating this right now. Last June, 1976, in Block Island, a man by the name of Gary Hall, while out fishing, pulled up something anomalous in his net. It was a strange carcass he had never seen before. I call it the Block Island blob, and I've been researching it. Anyways, it was almost like a plesiosaur in nature, a small plesiosaur like Dino the dinosaur, and he pulled that up in his nets, and of course it disappeared the next morning when he went to the locker to retrieve it.
Yeah.
But,
a Japanese fishing boat.
That's right.
20 years ago.
There's-
Whenever
Yep.
pulled up.
The Zuihu in 1977
Yeah.
pulled it up,
It was
and that's a
the
very
same.
convincing
Not
photograph.
knowing what it was, they threw it back in the ocean, but I think they may have taken pictures of it.
Yeah, they did.
And then they realized.
Right, well, they had to throw it back because it's rotting carcass, or the stench was
But as a practical matter, any of those, quote, monsters, they're not necessarily monsters, they're just, they're
uncatalogued
previous
beasts.
age, yeah.
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 Okay. All right, well, I'd like to conclude it this morning. Thank you so much for coming out. I appreciate it. Happy Halloween, you guys, and don't worry, ghosts aren't going to get you. But it was interesting to talk to all of you.
I want to thank John Horrigan for yet another fascinating lecture, and an incredibly rich one. It's only one of his variety on the paranormal. And I want to thank you very much for coming. Don't forget that Dennis Lehane, the great Boston mystery writer, is coming November 13th. So we'll see you then at 7 o'clock, Thursday night.
Thank you.
Okay. Great lecture. Thank you very much.